Debt. Ontario's debt. So what's the deal with Ontario's debt? How much is it? Where does it go? Why do we keep spending $1 billion a month on servicing it or more? It's 1.2 billion now. So this is a Financial Post article. And here we go. What's the story behind Ontario's debt? The Canadian Press takes a look. So, Ontario's governing Liberals have faced harsh criticism in recent years over the province's ballooning debt. The government's spring budget, which projected deficits over the next 6 years, would in turn inflate the debt level, prompted opponents to decry the Liberals as fiscally irresponsible. Now, this article was written in June 4th, just before the Liberals lost party status and control of the legislature in Toronto and Queen's Park. So, because they were fiscally irresponsible, really. Anyway, what is Ontario's debt? The Liberal government's spending budget projected the province's net debt, the cumulative amount of money owed, at $325 billion, or more than $22,500 per Ontarian for 2018-19. The debt is forecasted to grow to $360 billion by 2020-2021. Keep that number in mind, because we're going to get to an article from a few days ago that says something pretty close to that. This year's deficit is projected at $6.7 billion, although the Financial Accountability Office expects the figure to be closer to $12 billion. The office also expected the government spending to push Ontario's debt to a projected $400 billion by 2021. So from the government, the numbers are a $6.7 billion deficit and $360 billion by 2021. The Auditor, the Financial Accountability Office, says closer to 12 and closer to $400 billion by 2021. So that's some significantly different numbers. Like, we're talking billions of dollars. The 407 was sold in 1999 or 2000 for $3 billion. To put it into some kind of context, we're talking billions, and we're talking about $40 billion between now and 2021. 40 billion. That's a lot of money. Okay. So, wow, that's significant. And I'm just going to show you this. Here's the debt from 1987 to now. 1987, it was $31.5 billion. In 1997, $108 billion. In 2007, $150 billion. So that's not too bad. $100 billion to $150 billion in a decade. 2007 to 2017, $153 to $308. Oh, that's unfortunate. So, yeah, 2007 to 2018, we've had an absolute disaster running our government and spending our money. Back to the article. How do you quantify a province's debt? So how do you measure it? Quote, there are different ways of doing so. The government measures the debt, the ratio of debt to gross domestic product, GDP. It calculates the 2018-19 ratio at 37.6%. Moody's, whose rating of businesses and governments are widely seen as a key marker of financial performance, prefers to use the ratio of net debt to revenue, putting the ratio at 233% for the 2017-18, meaning debt levels were more than twice as high as income levels. Yake said that figure is rising to 237% in 2019-20, assuming the Liberal budget is executed as planned. So thank goodness it's not. But man, like, there's a lot of debt, and the way we're measuring it seems to be obfuscating just how much we're spending. Why are we spending 2.3% or 200% more than we're bringing in? It's insane. So if 100%, just to put us all on the same page here, if 100% is all of our revenue and we're spending more than 200%, that means we're spending all of our revenue and all of our revenue again and then some. So we need to... If you run a household like this, and I understand the governments are not households, but if you run a household like this, you are going to run into problems really quickly. And I think that if you run a government like this, you're going to run into problems sooner or later. And I think we're hitting later. I think we're going to run into problems. So why the negative outlook? As debt rises, Yake said the province will have to pay an increasing amount of interest on the debt. In fact, he said the interest payments projected to consume 8.8% in the 2018-19 budget and are the fourth highest expenditure behind healthcare, education, and children's and social sector. Interest payments account for 8.6% of revenue in 2016-17 and 8.3% in 2017-18. So it's going up. It's going up. How is Ontario stacking up against other provinces? Yake said Ontario currently has the highest debt burden of the jurisdictions Moody evaluates, which includes all the provinces and territories except the Yukon. Okay. So does that mean the government critics have it all wrong? No. Dodge questions the soundness of Ontario's fiscal strategy, saying that while there are some circumstances in which it makes sense to take on a higher debt burden, Ontario's current situation doesn't qualify. He said the borrowing makes sense if the money is being put towards an area that could generate revenue down the road, citing infrastructure as an example of an investment that would be ultimately boost productivity and bolster the GDP. In this case, however, he said that the province's budget is going towards healthcare and other programs that, while important, they won't yield future income streams. Yeah, so that's problematic. We're spending a whole lot of money on healthcare and social programs, and that doesn't help us down the road. So fast forward to today. So that article was from June. This is from September 18, and it's from the Toronto Sun. Quote, credit agencies eyeing growing Ontario debt, FAO. Ontario is being warned that something it does a lot, borrow money, could get more expensive. Quote, okay, the Financial Accountability Officer, FAO, has issued an update by economists David West and Nicholas Rhodes on the province's credit rating. Quote, with about $350 billion in total debt, Ontario is the most indebted province. And also posts one of the highest debt-to-revenue ratios compared to global peers, the report said. If the agencies decided to downgrade Ontario's credit rating, the cost of borrowing money would go up and put more pressure on Ontario's books. Over the next 3 years, the province will need to refinance $75.2 billion in maturing debt, the report says. New investment in capital assets, along with any funding needed to finance budget deficits, will further add to the provincial borrowing requirements. So anything we do, we're adding to the debt at this point in time. We're kind of stymied here. Although Premier Doug Ford has come to power on a commitment to return Ontario's books to balance, he has acknowledged that he is unlikely to eliminate deficits until the third or fourth year of his term. And I want to be clear, deficits are the difference between how much we are bringing in and how much we're spending. Currently, the deficit is at $15 billion, so we're spending $15 billion more than we're bringing in. Okay. Ontario's debt burden is projected, back to the article, Ontario's debt burden is projected to rise as the province borrows to fund new investments in capital assets, the commentary concludes. Debt could further be increased if additional borrowing is needed to finance budget deficits. S&P, DBRS, and Moody's have all warned that Ontario's rising debt could trigger downgrade. But the FAO points out that several other issues could add to spending, including rising interest rates and potential economic slowdown. So that's problematic too. So the report that is referenced in the last article I talked about is here. You can see the whole report, and we're going to look at a couple of pages of it on the PDF here. The link will be in the description, as with everything I talk about. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of the key findings. Okay, so let's find out what the report was authorized. The inquiry was authorized under the Public Inquiries Act 2009 to assess the previous government's accounting practices and to provide advice and recommendations on how the government can restore trust in Ontario's finances. So the key findings: the province has reported deficits in 20 of the previous 27 years. Over the same time, the provincial net debt grew by $263.2 billion, and Ontario's ratio of net debt to GDP ratio grew from 13.4% to 38%. So they're saying over the past 20 years. So this is, I mean, that's incredible. That's a huge spending spree we've been on. Do you guys feel it? Feel those good times rolling? No? Borrowing gives rise to intergenerational inequity concerns. Paying for programs and services Ontarians enjoy today through debt imposes costs on future generations who will have to pay back that debt and may not receive the same level of programs and services. Right. So if we don't have money to invest in updating and maintaining services now, we're instead paying the money to deliver the services. In 15 years, when the kids who are kids now have to start paying taxes, the services are going to be worse because we're all paying now directly for the services. We don't have any money to invest in anything else. There's back to the report. There was a deterioration in the relationship between the government and the Auditor General over time. Yeah, there sure was. So here's a Toronto Star article talking in December of 2017, talking about Kathleen Wynne and her overspending and lacks oversight. So, quote, Auditor takes aim at Wynne's government overspending, waste, lacks oversight. School board employees are taking more sick days, hydro ratepayers are getting zapped, and the government's books may not really be balanced, according to Auditor General Bonnie Lisk. Yeah, and it turns out that she's right from an independent inquiry has found that she's been correct. So we're going to go back to here. The previous government counted the assets from 2 jointly sponsored pension plans as their own to balance the budget, contrary to the Auditor General's opinion. Yep. Government rejects auditor's claim, concludes $10.7 billion pension, surplus an asset. So, Queen's Park is sticking with accounting experts who concluded the Auditor General miscalculated when she claimed the government could not count $10.7 billion of taxpayer-funded pension surpluses an asset. Treasury Board President Liz Sandals says the government is taking the advice of Tricia O'Malley, chair of the Canadian Actuaries Standard Oversight Council, over Auditor General Bonnie Lisk. I wonder, I don't know, and I'm not going to go and research this because this video has taken like 2 days of my time already, but I don't know what gives the government the right to ignore the Auditor General. I don't know what mechanism they use to say we're gonna listen to Tricia O'Malley over Bonnie Lisk, even though Bonnie Lisk has an official auditor position with Ontario, and Tricia O'Malley is the chair of the Canadian Actuaries Standards Oversight Council. But that doesn't have to do, in my very narrow scope of knowledge about the Canadian Actuarially Standard Oversight Council, that doesn't directly have to do with the Canadian government, like the Auditor General does, right? You'd think that there would be some kind of rule saying you need to listen to the Auditor General. And I get that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I understand that. If we say that the Liberals should be held to that account, then the Conservatives and any future government should be as well. I agree with that. They should be held to a standard. We have this position. Presumably this woman is paid to do this job, right? So saying, great job, thanks for you and your team, we appreciate you, here's your salary, here's your paycheck from the taxpayers of Ontario, now shut up and sit down because we're going to listen to this other person who agrees with us instead of you who don't, or you who doesn't. So that's strange, right? Like, that's weird. What mechanism within our government allows them to ignore this with impunity? And I'm not talking about using notwithstanding clauses to silence activist judges. I'm talking about the government has an obligation to work within the framework that we set up to govern them. So we have an Auditor General. Why are they allowed to ignore her? I don't understand. Anybody smarter than me, please fill me in. I would love to hear it. And lastly, the previous government pursued a costly and convoluted implementation model for global adjustment refinancing, a major component of the Fair Hydro Plan. Not only were the accounting practices problematic, but the policy decision lacked transparency and represented significant costs and risks. As currently designed, the global adjustment refinancing model would result in financing costs up to $4 billion greater than if the government had financed the plan directly. So if they had just financed this, it would have gone better than it did. Okay, this is a Financial Post article from March 2nd, 2017, just before the Fair Hydro Act went into effect. Quote, Ontario cuts hydro bills by 17%, but ultimately it will cost ratepayers $1.4 billion a year more. Yeah, because we have to borrow for this. The relief, which comes in addition to an earlier 8% rebate, is being achieved by refinancing that will add up to $1.4 billion a year in extra interest costs that will come due in the future. Yeah, 2021. So this is a quote from Kathleen Wynne. Quote, over time, it will cost a bit more. That's true, she said when detailing the plan, and it will take longer to pay off. That's also true, but it's fairer because it doesn't ask this generation of hydro consumers alone to pay the freight for everyone before and after. Electricity bills have doubled in the last decade, rising faster than inflation since 2010, and have sparked increasing anger among Ontarians, leading to plummeting approval rates for Kathleen Wynne. Yeah, shocking, right? But basically what they did, because I didn't understand well, hold on, we're going to read this here, because this is the actual report, and this gives a pretty good synopsis of what the whole scheme was, because it was a scheme. Like this wasn't oh, we're trying to reduce the price. I mean, I guess it was, but it's still a scheme. Anyway, okay, so here's page 16 of the report, the Fair Hydro Plan and Global Adjustment Refinancing. The Auditor General has articulated significant concerns with the government's proposed accounting treatment for a major component of the Fair Hydro Plan, referred to as Global Adjustment Refinancing. This section provides a brief, non-technical overview of the issue, summarizes the position of the former government and Auditor General, and sets out Commission's rationale coming to its recommendation. Evidence clearly shows that the former government pursued a costly and convoluted implementation model. This arrangement was intended to provide a significant short-term reduction in residential electricity rates while preserving the government's ability to publish a balanced budget. The accounting issues are relevant but secondary to the lack of transparency and the significant costs and risks inherent in the policy decision. The Commission recommends the government adopt an Auditor General adopt the Auditor General's preferred accounting treatment for global adjustment refinancing. Okay, background. Electricity prices in Ontario have increased steadily, outpacing the rate of inflation over the last decade. The trend reflects investments in generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure and efforts to achieve environmental objectives through energy policy. So in 2005, we started trying to, quote, green the grid. We got rid of oil and gas, or coal burning electricity generation and went to solar, wind, nuclear, and hydro, right? That's what this is referring to. So 2005, that process started, and they're saying it costs so much money that we're going to refinance some of it, so we're going to spread those costs even further. So if you take your house and you're like, oh my God, we can't pay the bills, we're going to refinance this again to 25 years instead of the 16 years we have left. That's essentially what they did. Okay, back to the report. Quote, a typical resident electricity bill in Ontario comprises electricity, delivery, and regulatory charges and sales tax. The electricity charge includes both the wholesale price of electricity and the global adjustment, which for residential consumers is a flat rate applied to their consumption. The global adjustment covers the fixed cost of building and maintaining infrastructure in addition to conservation and demand management programs. Okay? In early 2017, the former government announced the Fair Hydro Plan, a suite of measures to provide electricity rate relief for today's consumers. A key component of the plan was global rate refinancing, a time-limited 16% reduction on the average residential electricity bill starting in July 2017. This refinancing plan was intended to reduce rates today and pass the cost forward to future ratepayers. Under the plan, electricity prices are expected to be held to the rate of inflation through to 2021, after which rates are expected to increase more dramatically. The temporary reduction is financed through long-term debt, which the deferred global adjustment amounts plus total financing costs to be recovered from ratepayers in the future years. Implementation of the plan was affected through the Independent Electricity System Operator, IESO, and the Ontario Power Generation. Under the Ontario Fair Hydro Plan Act 2017 and its regulations, the IESO, which manages the electricity system, continues to pay generators at contracted rates. To provide the rate relief to residential consumers, it collects a reduced global adjustment from local distributors companies. The IESO records this shortfall as a regulatory asset on its financial statements, as the legislation establishes a right to collect the shortfall from ratepayers in the future. The IESO then sells this regulatory asset to a financing entity created by the Ontario Power Generation in exchange for cash. So wait, hold on a second. They're basically bundling it as an asset to buy and sell and bid on between now and 2021 when it comes mature, and then they can recover the cash from us? Weird. Okay, the transaction is financed through an equity injection into Ontario Power Generation from the government, a loan from the Ontario Power Generation. So the government loan was 44%, the Ontario Power Generation loan was 5%, and direct borrowing from capital markets at 51%. All of which ultimately was guaranteed by the Ontario government. And a regulatory, here's explanation of what is a regulatory asset. A regulatory asset is reflected on a balance sheet. It represents a current cost of service that an organization is entitled to recover from future customers. Over time, the asset is reduced as payments are received. The entitlement is permitted by the regulatory body that oversees the prices and the organization can charge for its services. In the absence of regulatory permission, the entity would be required to report the cost of service on its income statement as a current period expense. So without the legislation, this is an expense. They're short. It's a cost that they're not receiving, right? But with the legislation, oh no, we'll get it later and we're gonna bid on it, I guess, which seems crazy. So that was what they did. And here's what the report here's their opinion. Quote, while the Commissioner's mandate is to review the accounting practices related to the refinancing proposal, it is not possible to divorce the discussion of the accounting practices from the policy decision taken. The accounting and related financing arrangements were essential features of the proposal, meant to meet two objectives. One, reduce electricity rates, and two, balance the budget. The government's desired outcome was that the electricity subsidy would be funded by ratepayers and therefore have no impact on the deficit or net debt. This requirement led the government to pursue a risky, complex, and ultimately opaque implementation model. At the time the 2017 budget was released, Ontario already offered numerous programs providing electricity rate relief funded by a combination of taxpayers and ratepayers. The implementation of global adjustment refinancing reduced transparency by preventing the costs of the planned electricity subsidies from being reported as expenses when they were incurred. In pursuing the appearance of a balanced budget, the government compromised the ability of its financial publications to support an informed debate over policy priorities and how best to spend limited dollars. So basically, by lying to us, they prevented us a chance to have a real debate about how to spend our limited amount of money in taxes. And yeah, man, this is unfair of a government to behave this way, even if they have Ontario's best interests at heart. I mean, we're all adults. We should be able to make a grown-up decision based on all the facts, not the facts that Miss Wynne wants us to have because she wants to win the next election. It's unfortunate that the government can just kind of do this stuff with impunity. So fast forward to published on September 21st. The Ontario deficit is $8 billion higher than the Liberal figure, finance minister, but we knew that already. I mean, we had an idea. An independent report commissioned by the Progressive Conservative government in July and released on Friday also looked at higher expenses and lower revenues. The result is a deficit that has ballooned from $6.7 billion, according to the Liberals in June, to $15 billion, according to the accountants on Friday. In a statement, he said the Tories had restored reliability and trust in the province's reporting of its financial results. And that's as a result of the change. For the first time in 3 years, LISC, the Auditor General, gave Ontario's public accounts a clean audit opinion, which is great. Sorry, I forgot to highlight that. Pointing to the costs of servicing Ontario's $325 billion debt, Finance Minister Vic Fideli said that the government has a moral imperative to balance the budget. Interest payments on the debt are the fourth biggest line item in the Ontario province's budget. As I said, it's $1 billion a month. It's not small. So, sorry guys, that was kind of deep and very focused. But I hope you find it worthwhile. Thanks for sticking with me if you watched all the way through. And I don't know how we fix this problem. I don't know how we fix this. More transparency, less social services, I suppose. I don't think there's any other way out of it. But I could be wrong. Maybe, increase the GST to 8%? That's tongue-in-cheek. I don't think we should do that. But at this point, between Trudeau's wild spending federally and the Liberals' insane $150 billion spending spree from when they came to power to now, it seems like we're destined for a higher taxes to pay down this deficit. Maybe Doug Ford opens the ring of fire and we put profits into deficit and debt for 5 years while a little bit of austerity. I don't know. I don't know how we fix this. But it's not a great hole to be in, especially with NAFTA floundering at the very best at this point in time. So, frustrating, guys.